Okay, we are live everywhere. So this is our 7th panel of the day. So thank you so much everyone for joining in. I'm Jatin. I'm one of the co-founder of eChai Network, and this particular session is part of the CoRise Summit. It is our sincere effort to bring speakers, founders from all over the world to come and share their experiences and learnings. In the earlier ones, we had friends from Australia and Singapore, India, and now our US, North America thing begins, where we have fantastic founders who join. The theme for this particular session is broadly about funders' perspective on fundraising. So there are a lot of early stage startup founders who would want to raise funds. So idea is to understand, learn from the founders who raise funds and are in the process of raising funds. We are live on Zoom, so we'll have some friends who will be attending this session on Zoom, and it is also getting live streamed on eChai and Doane Foundation social media pages. So we may have some questions from there also. So this session, this entire summit is organized by eChai Network and Doane Foundation. Swaroop is with us right now on the call. We'll be having other friends joining in, and we'll just get started with a brief introduction. So each of the speakers will briefly introduce about themselves and the firm they are part of, and we'll get to the questions. Donald, if you can briefly introduce yourself and the company that you founded.
Sure. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. And yes, so my name is Doane. I am the CEO and co-founder of ConnectYard. And ConnectYard is an ed tech company. We've developed a platform that helps connect the disconnected and better to engage students and help institutions better understand how those students are learning. So we started the company a little over a decade ago, and our core mission then, as it is now, is to help bridge the digital divide. So yes, it's the same divide you're reading about today in in the news that's impacting millions of students. To be more precise, around 16 million in the U.S. alone. But if you look worldwide, the impact is in the tens of millions. And so our mission then was to help learners in the US at first to better connect to learning content. And so this started off primarily with community colleges who were in urban areas and also in rural areas. Both had connectivity issues, primarily servicing adults who were continuing education. And back then, even a decade ago, these adults who were continuing education were put at a disadvantage because many of them had families at home, as well as jobs. And if they didn't have a computer or connectivity, it forced them to stay on campus. And so this, in terms of student engagement, homework, all types of other activities that factor into learning outcomes, again, this proved to be very challenging for many of those students. And so what we did was we came up with a platform that allowed popular learning systems like Blackboard, Canvas, and others to be used by students who either had no internet, low internet, or slow internet. And so we did that here in the States. Then we branched out to the Middle East and Africa, because if you think about it, if you're in a remote village, there's no school bus coming to pick your children up. Same thing if you're in a desert, but somehow, right, you still need to deliver, learning content. And so we did something similar there. Then here, around the world, COVID hit. And again, all the work we had done has been pre-COVID, but when COVID hit here, the cities that we had many of our partners in were heavily impacted, including the city where I reside in New York, where there were 300,000 students, kids who could not connect or to any of the remote learning content. And so we actually started an initiative. It's called Black Learners Matter. And the goal of that initiative was to initially help students who were caught on the other side of the divide. But as we started down that path, we realized that there were many other issues, other challenges that needed to be addressed. And so we began to form a broader coalition, which involved everything from social emotional learning to understanding better how the impact of the COVID slide is affecting our communities.
Awesome.
So that's an overview of ConnectYard and the offering, and just I guess just to bring it back home for this particular panel, we did raise venture financing. So we raised 1.3 million at the outset, and I'm happy to share more details as we get into the conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much. So we'll have one round of introductions, and B is already here, so she will be moderating the panel. She has kindly agreed to moderate this panel, so thank you so much, B. Alex, if you can briefly introduce about your background and your firm.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm Alex West Steinman, co-founder and CEO of the Coven. We are a community and workspace for women, non-binary, and trans folks, headquartered in St. Paul with a second location in the Minneapolis area. So we have physical space, which is really interesting in COVID land. However, I'll tell you a little bit about our digital community and kind of why we got started. So there's 4 co-founders. We all met in the advertising industry here in the Twin Cities. The Twin Cities are Minneapolis and St. Paul, kind of 2 neighboring towns in Minnesota. We're in the middle of the country where there's not a lot of support for founders, for particularly women founders and folks of color. And so what we did was created an environment that you could kind of create a bias for risk-taking and action to allow you to step into your power, whether that be economically, whether that's like launching your own business, growing your own business, or even on the corporate side of things. About half of our members work for somebody else, but it could mean that they work up the courage, the skill set to ask for more money, to create a new program within their organization and beyond. So from day one, we actually crowdfunded. So we raised about what did we get to, like $350,000 via crowdfunding on a platform called I Fund Women. And that's how we raised our initial capital. None of us are like independently wealthy. And so we had to figure out some way to build out a physical space. And that's kind of where we navigated towards. Since then, we've done a small angel round and kind of like a bit of like friends and family, but on the angel side of things, and raised almost $1 million, and have opened 2 locations. When COVID hit, we ended up launching a digital platform. So pre-COVID, we were hosting about 2 to 3 events a week around personal and professional development, helping women kind of do all of those things that I mentioned earlier, and creating a connecting point for folks. And when COVID hit, we turned around a digital membership within 24 hours, doubled our membership, and hosted 2 to 3 events a day for the first like 3 months. And so now we're kind of evening things out. We found a really great cadence with our members, figure out, we do a lot of series programming around personal and professional development, and are kind of hanging on here through COVID.
Thank you so much, Alex. Chrissa, if you can briefly introduce yourself and your firm.
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. Thanks again for having me, Jatin. So I'm Chrissa McFarlane, the founder and CEO of Patientory. We're headquartered in Atlanta, Georgia. Digital healthcare company focused on really providing on-demand, access to health data for both patients, consumers, and the healthcare industry. We're actually one of the pioneering companies in the blockchain and healthcare space. We started out in 2015 before there was even an enterprise blockchain market, especially for healthcare, seeing that it's one of the most conservative industries out there. We actually raised funding through a token sale, which really came up during the 2017 boom in digital and cryptocurrencies. We saw the rise in Ethereum, which gave thousands of projects the ability to raise funds by issuing a digital token. We did that through our foundation, which the association is focused on bridging the gap between emerging technologies such as blockchain, AI, machine learning in the healthcare space to be adopted by industry, pharmaceutical companies, provider health systems, and insurance payers. So that token sale netted us about over 7 million in funding. That lasted around 3 days. So that was really, really gave insights into the need for digital healthcare solutions, especially now with COVID, as we're seeing, the lack of information transmittance, especially from the federal level in the US. Initially, our company was formed because of the rising concern of the chronic disease epidemic in the US. So over 117 million American adults suffer from one or more chronic illnesses, and the digitization of health data, as we saw with the rise in electronic medical records, gave, basically siloed gardens into health data, especially as it relates to HIPAA. Providers weren't able to share data. And even as we see the emergence of telemedicine adopted, there's still data and interoperability concerns in how we're getting access to that. So with blockchain, our company has successfully integrated with the P2 Matrix. It's a health information exchange and storage system. In the past 3 years, it now has the ability to aggregate data from over 10,000 health systems in the US. So that's roughly about 90% of the population that we can run data on that. And we're looking forward to, launching the products and services that are built on that system, especially as it relates to, post-pandemic and how we're able to better manage health.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chrissa. Ashlee, if you can briefly introduce about you and your firm.
Yeah, hi everybody. I am Ashlee Ammons. I am in Birmingham, Alabama, and I'm one of the founders of a software company called Mixtroz. Mixtroz, we built Mixtroz for the live event space, but then March happened. So we've done like a quick bob and weave and pivot. But the purpose of our software was we recognized, and my mom is my co-founder, so I think that that's a unique thing, specifically in the tech space. So my mom has background in HR. She was an HR executive for 25 plus years. I have background in event production. I used to be the national events director at Moet Hennessy for a long time, among other things. And we recognize that when people actually go to gatherings, agnostic of what kind of gathering it is, they generally will exhibit one of three behaviors. The first is people go with two events with people that they already know, and then they stick with those people. The second is people may go to events by themselves, but then they very quickly will scan the room, go towards people that they know already, or we naturally gravitate towards people who look like us. So if you've ever been in a room and it feels like it's broken up by race or gender or some other outward characteristic, that is just sociology working against us. And then the third thing that happens in the digital age is if you go into a room and you can't find someone to quickly engage with, you will very likely pull out your smartphone and find a corner and disengage from the room completely. And so all of that presents a problem because people actually go to events to make new connections. And so we created a software called Mixtroz to solve for that problem. So the way that our software got used on the live event side is an attendee would come in within 2 minutes, they could be set up in our system. That includes filling out a virtual name tag and then also answering a question series. Based on the way that the attendee answers questions, our software makes real-time groupings off of that data and shows each attendee what group they've been placed in, where they're meeting that group. And then once they get together, it gives them something to connect on so that it sparks engagement. And at the same time, all of the collected data is visualized for the organizer so we can provide an ROI on peer-to-peer engagement. We have pivoted over to the virtual space. And so we are now basically doing the same thing, except for when it's time to meet, we're putting you in a virtual meeting space inside of our software. So we say internally here, we can add some boom to your Zoom because Zoom fatigue is real. And when people are just sitting back and watching, they become disengaged. But when they're in a setting like this, they're more engaged because camera's on, you're getting the opportunity to add to the conversation and all of that. So that is what we do. And then as far as our funding My goodness, our funding trajectory. So we've been in this business for a long time. When we started the company, we were known as quad outsiders. So Black, female, non-technical tech co-founders, specific to the fact that my mom is not a millennial and we live in the South. So like a lot of issues. So it took us a really long time to be able to raise funding. The first 3 years of our business, we were able to raise $200,000 from our friends and family in addition to money that we put in ourselves. And then in 2018, we were able to raise a pre-seed round of funding, which was $1 million. And the important thing there is it is actually a pre-seed round of funding, even though we've been in the business a long time, because with that $1 million, it actually wasn't money to scale. It was money to go back and fix everything that was a business that was built on hustle instead of a business that was built on process. And so now I'm actually raising a true seed round so that I can scale. So I think talking about that is something I'm very passionate about, because when founders of color can't raise funding, it puts us forever behind the 8 ball. And if we were just able to raise the funding to begin with, we could stay on track with our peers.
Correct. Thank you so much. Chad,
Yes.
if you could briefly introduce yourself and your firm.
Sure. So my name is Chad Hall. I'm the CEO of a company called remodelmate. My co-founders and I come from the design and build space, specifically in construction. That means that we would handle all the things internally. So your plan set, your architectural plans, your permitting, materials, the labor, and all the project management will be done in-house. Homeowners really love that experience because it's predictable and gives you confidence in the experience. But I thought that there was way too many manual processes involved, which is what was leading to the $34,000 ticket price. So we started remodelmate because we wanted to be able to give customers the same experience of having everything done under one roof, and pun intended, and have that confidence that I'm going to get the same quality, the same predictability, but not have to worry about, is this going to bankrupt me in the process? So the way that we did that is primarily building software that uses computer vision for us to be able to scan the room and say, okay, this is the dimensions. We started with bathrooms as the first best project because of the high predictability. 9 out of 10 bathrooms are 5x8 in the United States. And they have a tub, toilet, and vanity. Even if you don't have a tub, you would have a shower in the same place. And then from there, those scans are turned into a 3D CAD model that you're allowed to manipulate. So if you wanted to move the toilet from one side of the room to the other, it's all something that you can visualize in our space. When you hit, your final design plan, we're able to turn that into a plan set that's ready to be submitted to your state board, so that you can get permits. That process would typically take 45 days and cost around $4,000. And for us, it takes 2 minutes and it's free. The next step is permitting. Anybody who's ever done a home improvement knows that permitting sucks, because you submit your plans and then you get a whole bunch of comments on how everything that you've submitted is out of date because they changed the code last week. And by the time that you make the revisions, there's been an update to that code. So all of that is done dynamically now. About 95% of our plan sets are approved on the first try. Again, shrinking the amount of time that it takes for you to get your permits issued, but also the headache involved with going back through revisions. So that was our core technology. Initially, we thought that we would just be a planning tool for homeowners, but we saw that there was a bigger opportunity for us to not only just cut down on the cost and the time that it takes for you to get ready, but then just follow it through to the end. So we built a materials marketplace where you can poke around our dashboard and pick out the freestanding soaking tub that you want to install in your bathroom, the hexagon tile, everything down to the paint color. And then there's a labor marketplace, so much like Uber for Postmates. All of our prices are set and transparent. So you can say, I'm going to gut the bathroom down to the studs, rebuild it with these materials. I've already got my plans, my permits, and I want to get started on Monday. All that happens for $13,000 instead of $34,000. and takes 3 weeks instead of 4 months. In our first round, so we bootstrapped for a year. I was lucky enough to have a little bit of cash saved over from my, I guess, employee earnings in the space. We bootstrapped for a year, raised $500,000 about a year ago. Since then, we have quadrupled the business. We went from $250,000 to $1 million in sales. And we are closing our next round of about $2.5 million as we speak.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And if this was a physical event, I would have asked B to say that stage is yours. But at this point in time, I would just say the screen is yours. So if you can briefly introduce yourself and lead the session.
Hello, everyone, and super excited to be here, especially to talk to a lot of the founders here. I either know, have seen, or I've read about your stories, so super excited. My name's B. Law. I'm the founder of Quirktastic, and Quirktastic is a social networking and group live streaming platform for geeks and gamers. Anyone who's into super nerdy things, that's me. I've been in business since 2017. We started as a media company, but then decided to pivot after doing customer discovery and launching our app in 2019. And we've raised about $250,000 so far. So still early in the process. But I'm super excited to talk to everyone here. I know we kind of vary in where everyone is in the process. So I have a few questions, and I'm going to just go through, target the founder that I want, and hopefully we can just answer them that way. So Chrissa, you're first on my list. And I believe I've either talked on the phone with you like a few years ago. I was a part of the Digital Undivided Incubator, and I know that you were a mentor one time. So super excited to see you and all of your success. With that said, you are in Atlanta, and we know that the Atlanta tech team the Atlantic tech scene is very different from Silicon Valley, even New York or Boston. Could you talk a little bit about your experience and how you found your community in the South, as well as you mentioned that you did a token raise. Could you also just tell us a little bit of like how that compares to like a traditional venture capital raise? So 2 questions there.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I started the company in Atlanta, but actually I went out to Boulder, Colorado to do an accelerator. Atlanta at the time, wasn't really known for health tech. Technology, even though it has like prominent healthcare systems like the CDC, Emory. So I actually went, relocated to Colorado for 6 months. And then at the end of that, my VC tour actually took place in the Bay. So I went from, Colorado to California because Atlanta, as well as not being, really honed in on health tech, most of the investors are in real estate. So while, the tech scene in Atlanta, is really thriving, one of the challenges we face with the companies is really gaining access to capital, right? As we know, most of the Silicon VCs are based in the Valley, and that's how that ecosystem was set up. So I did my fundraising there. Actually, I won pitch competitions. It was really successful, but that didn't always actually translate into, an investment. And I thought, wow, oftentimes being the only Black female in the room, I started to question that, which got me into exploring more at the time what was going on in the blockchain ecosystem. As it related to token sales. It was something in our product development roadmap that was much further along in the business, because we definitely wanted to see, have that MVP, but also the first beta to actually integrate a cryptocurrency, especially still, it's so nascent, in adoption at the moment. But the success that was happening with other companies, one of my advisors, they were actually one of the first 3 to do it. Gave me that ability to go out and do a token sale, because a lot, I was experiencing the same thing that this industry was experiencing. A lot of these startup founders, in blockchain were going to VCs who really didn't understand what blockchain and what decentralized economy meant for the future. So, through this ecosystem, I was able to hone in and really make relationships to have that successful crowdfund launch. I would liken it to like raising on Kickstarter or Start Engine, very similar. But we were in exchange, for funds, we were releasing, these tokens that essentially, was imperative to our business model and how, data would be stored on this blockchain system. So fast forward, I was out to the Valley, ended up going back to Atlanta. They had their first Atlanta startup battle. It was one of the top winners for that, back in 2016. And by, the end of the year, we had written a white paper and launched our decided to do that token sale in 2017, early 2017. So, our company was basically only one of the 2 in Atlanta to do a token sale. Unfortunately, it was still so early too, back, by 2018, the SEC decided, no, it has to be, confined to what they had put out in response to raising funds from the community. So now we have security token offerings, which isn't as popular because people raise like $1 million just to do that. So, well, you can actually take that money and put it into the business. But I still am a true believer in, especially for minority founders, less than 2% of minority women receive VC funding. But, like Alex mentioned with the Coven, there are platforms out there where you can crowdfund your ideas. But it would give you enough, traction to really have your product out there, which would essentially, gain some awareness with the VC community.
So from that story, it seems like you had a lot of things stacked against you. I mean, looking at the landscape that's already out there, and with you having to move to Colorado, well, thankfully with the accelerator, but not only did you have the current landscape, but then you also had the fact that you were one of the earlier women in blockchain. So I'm sure
and the only Black and only woman to be a founder that actually did a token sale.
Wow, that's
like
amazing.
All the odds against me, right?
Yeah, so I'm so happy that you were successful. I remember there was a time, side story, I remember there was a time where I would get all the emails about blockchain and like you'd see all of these white men and then I'd see your face on like a panel. I feel like you're doing panels all the time. So it's really good to see you on, I guess, the other side of that. Just one follow-up question to that. Are you thinking about raising any more funds? And if so, do you feel like it'll look different from the first time that you raised?
Yeah, so it's essentially, how we saw that raise was through, we actually set up a foundation to do that. Especially, being in an emergent space, being a pioneer in the space, that actually helped to build that ecosystem we were building. So at the moment we are raising, I would say, our first institutional round where we would essentially give equity in the business with the growth that we've achieved like in the past 3 years. So then it still takes on that traditional VC route with the traction that we have. And it's like I'm reliving, 2016, 2017 all over again. And I mean, even, people that are in here can tell that, raising funds is not always the easiest, right? But it definitely takes patience and commitment to see it through.
Yeah, thank you so much.
We are doing VC. I mean, how else? I would say in the life cycle of our business, we would probably only need to raise institutional funds at least twice. Given the business plan that we have and expected revenues. So as a founder going into this, you should also consider, whether or not, when is the right time to raise funds for your business, but also, the trajectory. Do you need to raise, to a Series D, or are you okay with just raising a Series A and a Series B? So that can help also to de-risk and put a lot of pressure on the raise process.
Awesome. Thank you. And my next question is for Ashlee. In addition to Chrissa, you are one of the earlier Black women to raise over $1 million. So claps for that. But you also did it as a non-technical founder in the South. I know that you are, you just mentioned that you are raising like a true seed round this time. I want to know what you think about the landscape from where it was when you first started to now as a Black woman. Do you feel like you're going to run into any of the same issues? I know in your intro, you mentioned how you first raised that little bit of money and then you were able to raise the full round. I just want to know your thoughts and how you're attacking it this time.
Yeah, so I think it's a loaded question, and for anybody that's watching, for anybody that like might be raising funding, like I want to stay very positive, but I also want to tell y'all that it is very hard. Like I like to be honest about it. It's very hard. It's not for the faint of heart. Like they call it fundraising. I don't know why. Like a fun being the first three letters in the word. Like I don't know why. Because it is honestly the exact opposite of that. You know, I have to say, I'm kind of disappointed to see where the market is like several years after raising the first round, because I think it's still too hard. I think there's still too many hurdles. I think the hurdles continue to move, you know, like someone may say like, oh, get to this in MRR. And then you go back to them and you're like, I'm there. And they're like, oh, actually, I meant this higher amount, you know? So it's just like, it feels like things continue to move and it's a bit too fluid. And I also think that there is an issue when a business is at like the earliest stages. Like, what are the metrics that are actually important that you're looking for? Like some people are like, I'm just looking for a feeling, it's the founder. And some people are like, you need to meet these metrics. And so I think that there's confusion, specifically outside of the coast where, you know, institutional investments aren't quite as mature. Like, I think that there's just too much of a sliding scale on what people are actually looking for. And like, when they say early stage, do they actually mean somebody raising a Series A? So I think that there's just some maturing that needs to happen in the landscape, specifically in the Southeast. And also, you know, because I am in the Southeast, the markets that investors are attracted to down here, they kind of are still looking for sure bets, not understanding that, you know, early stage investing is indeed risky. Like, I think that that's implied from early stage investing, but people here are looking for sure bets just because they're not used to investing, you know, in things that can certainly spark economic growth, but aren't like a sure thing. It's not like investing in a company that produces iron, you know what I mean? Like, you know, so I think that, that's an interesting place. Like, I wish that I thought that it was going to be simpler, but like I'm in the middle of raising right now and it is still a lot of hoop jumping. It's still a dog and pony show. Like, it's still, you know, it's still kind of, you know, changing my verbiage to match my audience and all of that. Like, I don't think it ever stops, unfortunately. And where I am today, just based on, you know, what's going on in the world, what's going on in the US, the conversations that we're having around race, I honestly don't think during my time as an entrepreneur, whether that's 5 years or 10 years, like, I don't think that I am going to feel that profound shift. I think that people who are maybe in elementary school right now, who are going to grow up into founders of color, I think that they will feel the work that we're doing right now. Like, unfortunately, I don't, based on what I've seen, how long I've been doing it, like, I don't think that it's going to be something that I feel. So unfortunately, I have to continue to play the game the best that I can. And I'm like, checkmate.
Yeah. Gosh, I can relate to that so much. I know with Quirktastic, even with us raising the small amount that we've done, like, we just kept hitting numbers, and then we were able to get some investment from Snapchat. So I like tried to use and leverage that name from that. But then it was like, oh yeah, we want you to hit like 50,000 users. And then we're like, all right, yeah, we hit that like in like a few weeks. And they're like, oh, we meant this much and you need to make this much revenue. And it's just like, why would you just change? I felt like I was like chasing a carrot that just kept moving on the stick, you know? So
yeah. And I was going to say, you brought up something good, and I saw that on just like some of the notes that you had. So you brought up something about me, which is in New York. So my small claim to fame is I was LeBron James' first intern. After that, I moved to New York City and I produced events for like all kinds of celebrities and all that kind of stuff. I was connected to people who had extreme wealth. And then I'll be honest, when you become an entrepreneur, like, if you count yourself blessed, if the network that you had pre-entrepreneur comes in to support you full force when you become an entrepreneur, because in actuality, kind of wherever you're coming from, entrepreneurship can kind of be the loneliest thing ever. That's why I'm like, if you can, find a co-founder so that y'all can commiserate on this journey together. But I will be honest, like, you know, all those great connections that I had in New York and like I had grown my career to have and whatnot, like entrepreneurship was going straight back to the bottom to no one knows who you are. No one knows what you're doing. People might give you a little thumbs up on Facebook, but that don't mean that they're opening their checkbook. So I think that when you become an entrepreneur, most of the help that you get along the way comes from the network you create, not from the network that you had in a previous life. So, you know, I think that that is something that people should think about as they go into entrepreneurship, and also consider like, everybody has their life that they're doing. I look back at myself when I was living in New York, the friends that I had, like they were, trying to live in New York, which is expensive. They were having their first baby. They were having a wedding. They were doing all these things. And they were like, go, Ashlee, go. But like no real understanding of what a startup was or what I was doing or why I was doing it, or that like, you know, people of color don't really get funded. Like they were just like, oh, that's terrible. You know, like it's just like, so don't have those high expectations for all the others around you, and think of it as a gift when something actually does come through, but expect that you're going to end up building a network which will help keep you going as you go through this journey.
That's awesome. And thank you for adding to that. For those who don't have the context, before Ashlee started her awesome business, she did work as a celebrity events producer for some amazing celebrity clients. So I was going to ask her how those connections worked in, and she definitely let us know. I do just very quickly, if you could tell us in like a sentence or so, is there a way from your first round of investors, do you feel that those investors will be able to support you in this next round, or do you feel like you're starting from scratch again now that it's a larger round?
Yeah, I think that we're looking to just diversify what our cap table looks like. So we're looking for more persons of color. I think people who are a bit savvier in investment. So people who have maybe lived on a coast but have relocated to nearish our area. That's kind of what we're looking for, because 90% of the last round came directly from Birmingham.
Oh, great. Great to know. Well, thank you so much, Ashlee.
Thank you.
And my next question is for Alex. So nice to meet you. And you have an amazing co-working space, and I will, I guess, stop myself from asking the questions of how are you doing in COVID, because I pray that you're doing well. But you have this awesome space for women, trans and binary folks who are building their businesses in Minneapolis. And it kind of made me think about how important, similar to how Ashlee was mentioning about community, not only from the investment side of things, but also just like building your team members and things like that. And as a mentor myself, that's a question that I get all the time, is like, how do I build my team? How can I grow my network so that when I do go to raise, I have someone to support me? I would just ask you, what advice do you have to underrepresented founders who are searching for an entrepreneurial community that may not be in the Minneapolis area and can't take advantage of the Coven? And what do you think is the best way for them to tap that community when they decide to fundraise?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think Ashlee mentioned this, like being a founder is extremely lonely, and I have three other co-founders. So there's four of us, and it still is lonely. And especially being like the CEO, especially being like the Black CEO. I mean, there's a lot that goes into that. And so finding other like-hearted individuals who are aligned with kind of your mission is really important. I think pre-COVID, places to find those folks and build those networks are honestly like chambers and local organizations and places where people are convening. I think I'm really lucky to be a convener. And so for me, like my community, like the community that we've uncovered here at the Coven, is truly the community that, I lean on when I need support in how do I find talent? How do I retain talent? How do I, grow my business? How do I think about fundraising? I think post-COVID, I'll tell you that, we're figuring out, how do we connect our members to each other in a virtual space that's really meaningful. We can have dialogues like this, but all of our attendees here are, I can't see everybody. So I can't react to, to them in a normal way, like I would normally on a panel in person. So I do think about, we're exploring kind of ways to do that. I think, we're actually hosting events specifically about like how to do virtual community and how to do virtual networking. I do think one thing that's been interesting coming out of, particularly in the, aftermath of the murder of George Floyd, I'm again in Minneapolis, where, the epicenter of the uprisings. And there's just been so much outpouring of support among Black women. And so for me, like, it's not only did, I have a group of Black women friends before, but now we're all checking in on each other on a daily basis, or we're all connecting with each other on a monthly basis, whether it's about business or not. It's about kind of our mental well-being. And I think, again, Ashlee mentioned this too about, how challenging fundraising is and how lonely it is. Like, you truly need somebody to talk to about it, because you're going to hear, 300 no's before you get your, 5 yeses. And, while we were going through that for a year and a half, it was, challenging at first, and then you kind of get used to it. And then you also have your network of people who are cheering you on and, keeping you going. I would say too, just like a quick plug, is because we have a virtual membership, our members are all from all over the world. So if you're interested in participating in our virtual networking or any of our events, most are free to members. You can join at thecoven.com.
Awesome. And I urge everyone to go look at the website. It's such an amazing website. I wish I could come and visit the space, but it is awesome that you are offering now a digital space for people all around the world. So one last question for you, if you could answer it really quickly. Just doing my research on you, I found out that you do have a background in PR, and a question that I always get asked is like, how can I leverage PR when I'm fundraising, or when's the best time to leverage PR? Do you have any quick tips for any early founders wanting to leverage press before they fundraise?
Yeah, the first thing I'll say is to have something to tell, have a story to tell, because you'll be beating your head against the window if you're kind of constantly reaching out to press without news. And so having something to share. I think origin stories are really fascinating, particularly for BIPOC founders. As a PR professional of color, it's honestly like people are looking for stories right now about BIPOC founders and how we can support that community. And so now would be a great time to like invest a little bit in either outreach or helping to build that story. But what I will say is, like, just because you have a crowdfunding campaign does not mean you have a story. And so you need to think about like, what's the compelling story you need to tell. And then your second question, the other question I forgot, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, that was pretty much it. It's just like the best way. Yeah, that was it. Just like the best way to leverage press before a fundraise. So I feel like.
Oh, yeah. I guess the other thing I was going to say quickly too is just that when you look at VCs in particular, like, it's nice to have headlines, but it's not necessary. In fact, really savvy VCs will see those as like, it's table stakes to have, like 4 or 5 headlines about you, or you featured in certain articles. But it's not necessarily going to like make them write a check. And so I wouldn't lean too heavily on it. In fact, I think some VCs find it to be like a vanity statement or a vanity plate. And what they want to see are, what are your month over month growth? What's your CAC? Like all of those things. So like, know your numbers and don't rely on press to be like the thing that is the most exciting thing about your brand. It should be supplemental.
I completely agree. I know whenever I was featured in Forbes, I was like, oh, this is my ticket in. And like the checks definitely did not come. But what I did notice is I was able to basically tell my network, like, hey, if you have anyone in your network, I was recently Forbes, if you could share this article with them and maybe make an introduction, that would be great. And like, kind of doing that caveat is like, oh, this person was recently in the news. I think this is a founder that you may like. That worked better for me as opposed to like, hey, look at me, I'm in Essence Forbes, whatever, you know?
Yeah,
So.
no, that's really smart. And what I would say is like the best place to put press is like a boosted post on Facebook. Like you'll get the most engagement with press posts. So that's where I would like spend that investment. If you have a little bit of marketing money, is like put it behind that, because it validates it for your customers. If your customers are like, if you're not B2B. So I would just maybe think about that a little bit of how you can use your press for good, and not rely on it for investors.
Thank you so much. And then my next question is for you, Donald, if you're ready.
Oh, yeah.
Awesome. So I read that you raised your first 2 rounds of funding through angel investor networks, which is different from like the traditional VC in my experience. I would like to know kind of like what made you go through that route, as well as what was the traction that you were looking for? Because I know that whenever you are looking for VC funding versus angels are very less, or they're very more like risk averse. I want to know if that was your experience. So I'd love to know.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the fund, so the group that we raised our rounds through, it actually functions more like a fund than a traditional angel network. So they actually have LPs and the whole nine. So it was actually quite similar to the process you would go through for a VC. But part of the reason, the other part of your question in terms of why we opted that direction had a lot more to do with my prior experience in fundraising. So before ConnectYard, I had another company that I started, and I did not raise any outside capital for this company. So when I started the company, typically for most entrepreneurs, you go through what I call the triple F fund, right? It's family, friends, and fools. Well, for myself, and I'm sure many other folks in our community can relate. I'm the first generation college grad for my family. So in terms of any sort of built up wealth in my family, that was non-existent. So it wasn't a matter of me I didn't have a rich uncle to go to. There was no one who's going to help me to bootstrap or seed fund the company. And the family friend network was also sparse. And I didn't know enough fools. So I wasn't lucky in that regard. I did, go out and I tried to raise money for that company, met with over 200 VCs. My experiences there as a Black man were very interesting. I had one case where one of the VCs, as soon as I walked in, said, "Oh, it got dark in the room all of a sudden."
Wow.
I had another professional investor who, after my pitch, kindly asked me to go get him and the other partners glasses of water. It was a striking experience as an entrepreneur. So at some point, I decided that I was going to bootstrap the company. I was a coder. I developed the software myself. Brought on people to help me to sell. Got some advisors, and eventually that company went on to generate several $1 million in revenue. And then eventually I licensed out that tech. And sold off the rest of the company. And then I was in a position to do something new. So at that point, I went and found my co-founder, who's also a Black male. And the two of us decided to go on this adventure together. So I funded the company initially. And I was really, debating whether or not to go out and raise any money. Because my experience had been, quite honestly, just horrible with the last company. I truly debated, and my co-founder, he was a bit more adamant about us going out and at least trying to do some form of outside, form of outside raise, and so I wasn't at the time willing to take on as much dilution. And so agreed to do a smaller raise, and that's eventually why we wound up targeting more of the angel, really more so to do with the size than anything else. I will say the second time around, the experience was much improved, even though at the time, I'm sure the number of Black founders cross industry was very little. I mean, the report that I saw from Harlem Capital had overall somewhere around a couple hundred Black founders that raised over $1 million since the year 2000, which is just, if you think about that number, it is just, it's incredible. But we were able to raise, 1.3 million. And that, that took us, so it's interesting. I think it was, I'm not sure it was Ashlee that mentioned it earlier, just in terms of deciding, how much do you raise? How far do you go? We took it to a Series A, and then we're able to close contracts that helped us to scale. So yeah, it was a very interesting experience on the VC side for me, then initially, and then coming back around on the angels, much different. The angel group at Jumpstart, which is who we raised the money through, very diverse group, heavily invested on impact investing. So they got it immediately. It was about a 6-month process, but it was a lot smoother.
Awesome. And for those who don't know, Donald raised his round of funding. It was the early 2010s. Am I correct on that?
Yeah, that's right.
So definitely set the stage for founders like us. I just wanted to show my appreciation for kind of setting the stage for us. It still definitely has a lot more improvement to go, but it is just wonderful that there were founders like you who were making these risks at the beginning. So thank you for that. We are at our last 10 minutes, and we have another amazing founder, Chad, that I'd love to ask some questions to. And I did save you for last, Chad, because I saw the amount of funding that you raised, and also that it was a bit more recent than some of the other founders. So I wanted to just kind of ask you about your process, since it may be a bit like more recent for you. So within the last year, you did raise the 525,000, I believe. So congrats on that. And you have your new round that's coming up. I wanted to know more about your bootstrapping, because I know that you were in, I think you said a year beforehand. How long did it take you to raise that round if it wasn't a year, as well as how did you survive before that?
Sure. So my career path is working at the Aflac insurance company. I built a $3 million insurance business there over the course of like 2.5 years. Then I got to work at Long Fence. It's the largest residential home improvement company on the East Coast. Did that for probably 2 years. While I was there, I did $2 million in sales. We get 10% commission plus bonuses. So that also worked out really well. And then I got an opportunity to work at Living Social before Groupon put us out of business. And as a part of my exit package there, I got, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8 grand. So starting the company, I wasn't sure that I was going to raise venture capital. I just was hell bent on building a better version of Long Fence, who did, all the things that we talked about before, plans, permits, etc. So when we started out, we basically said, what are the fewest number of things that we need to get right to prove that we're not nuts for asking people for 13 grand over the internet. That doesn't sound as crazy today as it did 3 years ago. But it was kind of nuts to say like, yeah, we're going to just renovate your bathroom. You don't need to see it. No one's going to come out. We don't have samples. Like everything's just going to happen online. So the website was built in like a week. We use Bubble, which is basically like Wix for apps. And everything else was really just marketing. We needed to figure out ways to get the word out. I'm also part of a fraternity, so I spanned like every chapter in the area, and said like, yo, I can do your bathroom for like 70% off. And that's how we ended up getting our first couple of customers. What seemed like a Hail Mary ended up actually being a really good strategy because of the natural network effects that fraternities have. So, you know, they're kind of like, Chad from this chapter is doing this, and I tried him out and it went really well, so you should try him out. And I was able to get in front of like, I don't know, 100 or 200 people at our, you know, monthly chapter meetings, to be able to pitch. But I wasn't pitching for investors, I was pitching customers. So between having like a free marketing channel and then just using any cash that came out of the business and putting it back into ads, we were able to do $250,000 in sales. And when you think about like our average order being 13 grand, it's only 20 customers. It's not very big compared to what you guys are saying. The investors are asking for 50,000 users, right? Like we were nowhere near that big. But being able to prove that one, people want this, two, that people are willing to pay for it with $8 grand was impressive. So at this point, I'm kind of like, okay, well, if I could do that with $8 grand, I wonder what I could do with more money. And that was basically what my pitch was, right? Hey guys, I'm not technical. I didn't drop out of Stanford or Harvard, and I'm in DC, but I'm beating all of those guys up. The ones that can raise $4 million with a pitch deck and no traction. So I found out that that's probably not the best way to approach people when you're asking them for money, because they're like, oh, well, what's wrong with this guy? He has an attitude problem. But in a way, it also made me like formidable, right? They were like, I don't know, I might not like him, but I think that he's going to build a big company. And at the end of the day, like that's what their job is, right? Find people who can build companies that deliver outsized returns for their investors. So that was helpful. As far as like actually running the process, everything that I learned about raising, I took from YC. I didn't get into Y Combinator. I just read, like I watched all the how to start a startup lectures and all the white papers. And I think that I'm also skipping out on the fact that I got a lot of help from much more mature entrepreneurs. So Rodney Williams is a close friend of mine. Chris Bennett over at Wonder School. Justin Goldman, he runs RenoFi.
Chad, I'm really sorry. I'm cutting you down. We have a very hard stop because in 3 minutes we have to start the another session.
Yeah, I'll be able to wrap it up.
Yeah. So thank you. So we'll have to do the hard stop because there is other session that we'll have to start in 2 minutes. But thank you so much, everyone. I really wish that that we could have had more time for this. But there are 5 other speakers who are waiting for the session, and I will be using that. And B, thank you so much for all your support. You have asked wonderful questions, and that has got wonderful insights. And all of you know, you spend your time for pulling this off. This was our sincere effort. So to bring good experience and create good content for everyone. And I would really look forward to connecting with all of you again. This was live on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter also. So let's stay connected. I'm really sorry we'll have to cut you down, but we'll have to move to the another session. Thank you so much.